Sunday mornings at Mason's Diner carried the sacred rhythm of clinking coffee cups and whispered prayers over pancakes. Connor Reeves savored these stolen moments with 8-year-old Zoe, watching her paint syrup hearts across golden stacks, while autumn light filtered through rain-streaked windows, mingling with the comforting scent of bacon grease and small-town contentment. It was their weekly ritual, this peaceful communion of father and daughter, the one constant in a life that had known too much change. Then the door chimed. 3 men entered like shadows given form. Charcoal suits pressed sharp enough to cut glass, shoes that had never touched honest dirt. They moved with the fluid precision of apex predators, their collective gaze sweeping the diner until it locked onto a solitary figure at table 7. The woman sat frozen, porcelain coffee cup suspended halfway to trembling lips. Her knuckles blazed white against brown ceramic. Fear poured off her in waves that seemed to chill the very air. The lead man's voice shattered the morning's gentle murmur like a stone through stained glass. Evelyn Cross. Time crystallized. Connor's fork hovered above Zoe's abandoned pancakes as something ancient and dangerous stirred in his chest. Recognition born from darker days he'd buried deep. His voice emerged steady, cutting through the suffocating tension. Wrong table, wrong day, gentlemen. The 3 men turned in perfect synchronization, their attention shifting like searchlights, finding new prey. The lead figure, silver-haired, 60-something, with eyes that had witnessed too many secrets, studied Connor with the intensity of a jeweler examining a diamond for flaws. His companions flanked him like bookends of menace, hands resting casually near jacket lapels in a way that suggested concealed weapons. The woman called Evelyn Cross remained motionless, her breathing so shallow it barely disturbed the steam rising from her untouched coffee. Connor caught a flicker in her eyes, not just fear, but something else, something familiar. The look of someone trained to observe, to process, to calculate odds even when those odds seemed insurmountable. Zoe looked up from her syrup artwork, sensing the adult tension that crackled through the air like electricity before a storm. "Daddy," she whispered, her small voice cutting through the silence more effectively than any shout could have. Connor placed his hand gently on Zoe's shoulder, never breaking eye contact with the silver-haired man. The gesture appeared protective, but those who knew how to read body language would recognize the coiled tension in his forearms, the slight shift in his stance that suggested military training buried beneath years of civilian life. "I think the lady's trying to enjoy her breakfast in peace," Connor continued, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from commanding troops in places where hesitation meant death. The diner's other patrons began to notice the standoff. Conversations died mid-sentence, forks paused halfway to mouths, and the waitress behind the counter froze with a coffee pot in her hand. Cedar Falls, Ohio, population 8,712, rarely witnessed confrontations more dramatic than disputes over high school football standings. The silver-haired man's smile never reached his eyes. Vincent Carmine, he introduced himself with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to having doors opened and questions answered without resistance. "And you are?" His voice carried a faint East Coast accent, polished by years of expensive education and refined by decades of getting exactly what he wanted. Connor recognized the type. Power wrapped in civility, violence dressed in designer clothing. He'd met similar men in darker corners of the world, where American interests demanded protection and moral boundaries became inconveniently flexible. "Someone who thinks you gentlemen might be more comfortable finding what you're looking for somewhere else," Connor replied, his Midwest drawl deliberately emphasizing the contrast between them. Evelyn Cross finally moved, her hand trembling as she reached for her purse. Bills scattered across the table as she fumbled for her wallet, a 20, 2 fives, and a handful of crumpled ones that spoke of someone carefully managing limited resources. Vincent's gaze followed the money with amusement, as if poverty was a curious affliction he'd never personally experienced. "Miss Cross and I have unfinished business," he said, his tone suggesting that this business was not the kind that could be postponed or rescheduled, the kind that requires privacy and understanding. The pause before understanding carried enough menace to make several nearby diners suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. Chairs scraped against linoleum as people made hasty exits, leaving only the protagonists and a handful of regulars too stubborn or too curious to abandon their morning routines. Connor stood slowly, his 6'2" frame unfolding with deliberate precision. Years of carrying lumber and swinging hammers had built functional muscle beneath his flannel shirt, but it was the way he moved, balanced, alert, ready, that caught Vincent's attention. "Zoe," Connor said without turning around, "why don't you go ask Dolores for some more syrup?" The 8-year-old hesitated, her instincts telling her that something important was happening, something that adults usually try to shield children from witnessing. But her father's tone brooked no argument, and she slid from the booth with reluctant obedience. Dolores, the gray-haired waitress who had been serving Mason's customers for over 2 decades, beckoned Zoe toward the counter with practiced understanding of when children needed to be elsewhere. Something in her eyes told Connor she'd seen trouble before and knew how to keep innocence clear of it. With his daughter safely distant, Connor felt familiar ice settle in his veins, the same cold focus that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. The carpenter's hands that now crafted furniture had once assembled tactical strategies in combat zones where second chances were non-existent. There was a time when Sergeant Connor Reeves had been a name whispered with respect among the 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, for the incident in Kandahar province, for he'd discovered that some enemies wore the same uniform as friends, before he'd learned that speaking truth to power could cost more than silence. 3 Purple Hearts and 2 Bronze Stars testified to his courage under fire, but it was the unwritten chapter of his service record that had ultimately driven him from military life to the quiet sanctuary of Cedar Falls, where he'd rebuilt a life around his daughter and his craft, piece by piece, like the careful joinery of a fine cabinet. The night it had all changed still visited him in dreams, the convoy moving through the outer reaches of Kandahar, the intel about insurgent movements that had seemed too precise, too convenient. Connor had voiced concerns to his commanding officer, suggesting they alter their route. Orders had come back. Proceed as planned. 4 hours later, 3 good men died when their lead vehicle triggered an IED that shouldn't have been there. In the investigation that followed, Connor had discovered financial irregularities, massive payments disappearing from reconstruction funds, weapons shipments that never reached their destination. He'd followed the evidence up the chain of command, only to find closed doors and veiled warnings. 2 weeks later, he was ambushed on a routine patrol by fighters who knew exactly where he would be. The official report called it bad luck. Connor called it betrayal. The day he received his honorable discharge, a senior officer had pulled him aside. "Some battles can't be won from inside the system, son," he'd said. "Choose the ones you can win." So Connor had chosen the battle of raising his daughter, of crafting a life where honesty and hard work still meant something, where the consequences of his decisions affected only those he could see and touch. He'd sworn off causes greater than his immediate circle, finding peace in the tangible results of his labor. A table that would outlast its maker, a chair that bore the weight of generations, a home that sheltered what mattered most. His workshop had become his sanctuary, a place where problems had solutions, where broken things could be made whole again with patience and skill. The smell of sawdust and varnish, the weight of tools worn smooth by generations of craftsmen, the satisfaction of joining 2 pieces so perfectly that the seam disappeared. These were constants in a world where too many things shifted without warning. Connor found wisdom in woodworking that applied to life itself. You couldn't rush seasoning timber. You couldn't skip steps in finishing. You had to respect the natural grain, work with the material's inherent properties rather than forcing it against its nature. Patience, precision, respect for tradition, while adapting to circumstances, these were the foundations of both his craft and his character. Local folks had started bringing him their heirlooms to restore. Chairs that had rocked 5 generations of babies, tables that had held Thanksgiving dinners since before electricity reached rural Ohio, cradles that had been passed down through family lines stretching back to Civil War days. They trusted him with their history, with tangible links to ancestors long gone, knowing he understood the responsibility of preservation while making things functional for modern use. The irony wasn't lost on Connor, that he'd found purpose in restoring connections to the past after his own history had been severed so completely. that he'd become part of a community's continuity after his own life's trajectory had been so violently interrupted. After Sarah's death 3 years ago, a rain-slicked highway, a drunk driver crossing the median, a funeral where Zoe had been too young to understand why mommy wasn't coming home, Connor had devoted himself to creating stability. Their small house on Maple Street with the workshop out back had become his fortress against chaos, a place where control was possible, where variables could be measured and outcomes predicted. The drunk driver had walked away with a suspended license and community service. Connor had watched the sentencing with stone-faced dignity, had declined to make a victim impact statement when the judge asked, "What could words do in the face of such loss? How could any punishment restore what had been taken?" Instead, he'd channeled his grief into ensuring Zoe would grow up knowing she was secure, protected, loved beyond measure. He taught Zoe practical skills alongside life lessons. She could measure twice and cut once, could identify different wood grains, knew the satisfaction of creating something with her own hands. More importantly, she was learning resilience, that mistakes were opportunities, that broken things could be fixed with patience. That loss didn't mean the end of everything good. When nightmares woke her, Connor would sit beside her bed and tell stories about her mother's courage, how Sarah had faced down life's difficulties with grace and humor, how she'd believed that kindness wasn't weakness, but the hardest kind of strength. He made sure Zoe knew she came from people who didn't quit, who faced hard truths and still found reasons to smile. The town had embraced them both after Sarah's passing. Casseroles appeared on the porch. Neighbors mowed the lawn unasked during those first devastating weeks. Zoe's teacher made special accommodations for missed homework and emotional outbursts. It wasn't perfect. Nothing could fill the Sarah-shaped hole in their lives, but it was community in the truest sense. People bearing one another's burdens without expectation of repayment. Connor had found an unexpected ally in Sheriff Mike Townsend, a Vietnam veteran who recognized the signs of combat stress that sometimes still ambushed Connor in unguarded moments. Mike never pushed for details about Connor's service, but made himself available for pre-dawn coffee when sleeplessness struck, offering the silent companionship of someone who understood that some experiences defied explanation. "You're building something good here," Mike had told him one morning as they watched the sun climb over the eastern farmland. "Most of us come back looking for purpose. You found yours in that little girl and this town. Not everyone gets that lucky." Lucky wasn't how Connor would have described himself, not with Sarah gone, not with the nightmares that still woke him sweating some nights. But he understood what Mike meant. Purpose was the difference between surviving and living, between existing and building a life worth the hardships endured to reach it. Cedar Falls had become home in ways that surprised him. He knew the rhythms of small-town life now. Friday night football games where the entire community gathered regardless of whether they had kids on the team. 4th of July picnics where 3 generations competed in egg tosses and 3-legged races. Christmas pageants where every child got a part, regardless of talent. There was something authentic about a place where everyone knew your business but helped anyway, where reputation was built on consistent character rather than momentary impressions. Connor had even started dating again, tentatively, awkwardly, at the persistent encouragement of Zoe's second-grade teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, who seemed determined to ensure that every eligible adult in town found companionship. Nothing serious had developed. Most relationships fizzled after a few polite dinners when it became clear that Connor's priority would always be his daughter. But the effort itself represented progress, a willingness to consider possibilities beyond the closed circle of grief. But now 3 strangers in expensive suits had brought the unpredictability of violence back into his carefully constructed world, and something long dormant was awakening. Instincts honed through years of combat that recognized threat patterns before conscious thought could name them. Connor studied the men arrayed before him, reading the subtle tells that separated professionals from amateurs, the way they positioned themselves in relation to exits, the constant awareness of their surroundings, the economy of movement that suggested training rather than natural talent. These were men who had made violence a career, who had systematized the art of intimidation into something coldly effective. His years in special operations had taught him to catalog threats instinctively. Primary, secondary, contingent. He noted the slight bulge beneath the jacket of the man to Vincent's left, shoulder holster, likely a compact semi-automatic. The third man's stance suggested a knife specialist, someone comfortable with close quarters combat. Vincent himself carried no visible weapon, but radiated the confidence of someone who rarely needed to dirty his own hands. "Now, gentlemen," Connor said, his voice dropping to conversational levels that somehow carried more threat than shouting could have achieved. "I'm going to suggest that whatever business you think you have with the lady can wait until she's finished her meal." Evelyn looked up at him with confusion and something that might have been hope. Her brown eyes searched his face for clues about why a stranger would risk confronting obviously dangerous men on her behalf. She was older than he'd first estimated, mid-40s, with premature gray streaking through dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and accumulated worry. There was something familiar about her features, though Connor couldn't place where he might have seen her before. Perhaps it was just the shared look that veterans of different kinds of battles sometimes recognized in each other. The weathered resilience that came from seeing too much, from carrying on when the surrender seemed more reasonable. Vincent exchanged glances with his companions, some unspoken communication passing between them. The man to his left, shorter, stockier, with scarred knuckles that suggested extensive experience with violence, shifted his weight in a way that placed his gun hand closer to his jacket's interior. The third man remained perfectly still, but his eyes cataloged everything: exits, potential weapons, civilian positions, possible complications. These were professionals, Connor realized, not local muscle hired for intimidation. They carried themselves with the confidence of men who had eliminated problems much larger than a single carpenter in a small-town diner. "Mr. Reeves," Vincent said, and Connor's blood turned to Arctic water. He hadn't given his name. "Yes, we know who you are, just as we know who Ms. Cross really is and why she's been hiding in your charming little town for the past 3 months." The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Connor's mind raced through possibilities. How did they know his name? Why had they been watching him? And what did they want with the woman who had apparently been living under an assumed identity in Cedar Falls? Evelyn's face had gone beyond pale to a sickly gray color that suggested she was fighting nausea. Her hands shook as she reached for her coffee cup, needing something to steady herself, but too nervous to trust her coordination. The cup rattled against the saucer like chattering teeth. "I think," Connor said carefully, "that you've got me confused with someone else." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they sounded hollow. The way Vincent smiled told him that denial was pointless. These men had done their homework, and whatever they knew about him went far beyond what public records would reveal. "Sergeant Connor Reeves, 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment," Vincent continued with the satisfied air of someone playing a winning hand. "3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and 1 incident in Kandahar province that never made it into your official service record." The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Connor felt phantom pain flare in old wounds, muscle memory of explosions and gunfire that no amount of civilian life could fully erase. He glanced toward Zoe, who was pretending to be absorbed in selecting packets of sugar while obviously straining to overhear adult conversation. How much did these men know? How far back did their research go? And most importantly, what did they want badly enough to risk exposing their own presence by confronting him in public? The mention of Kandahar struck at Connor's most guarded memories. Few people knew what had happened there. Fewer still understood the implications. The fact that Vincent Carmine had this information suggested connections that went beyond ordinary criminal networks, reaching into the shadowy intersection where government operations and private interests sometimes met in deniable arrangements. Connor had walked away from that world, had deliberately chosen a life built on solid, tangible realities rather than shifting allegiances and moral compromises. He'd made peace with the understanding that some battles couldn't be won, some systems couldn't be reformed from within. He'd found purpose in the smaller victories of daily life, raising a daughter with integrity, creating objects of beauty and utility, being part of a community where a man's words still carried weight. Yet here was his past, intruding on a Sunday morning, threatening everything he'd built. The instinct to protect warred with the desire to remain uninvolved. Zoe's safety demanded that he extract himself from whatever was happening. But something in Evelyn's eyes, a desperation that mirrored what he'd once felt when facing institutional indifference to corruption, made retreat impossible. Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with enough force to draw attention from the remaining customers. "This is my problem," she said, her voice stronger than her shaking hand suggested. "Leave him out of it." There was something in her tone, resignation mixed with protective instinct, that made Connor reassess everything he thought he understood about the situation. This wasn't a random encounter or a case of mistaken identity. These people knew each other, had history that predated their arrival in Cedar Falls. The question was whether that history was something Connor could walk away from, or whether it had already trapped him the moment he decided to speak up. Vincent's smile widened, but it was the kind of expression that belonged on documentary footage of predators selecting prey. "I'm afraid Mr. Reeves inserted himself into our business the moment he opened his mouth," he said. "And now we're all going to have a much longer conversation." The diner's bell chimed again as two more men entered, larger than Vincent's companions, with the kind of muscle mass that came from professionally applied violence rather than gymnasium vanity. They positioned themselves near the entrance with casual efficiency, blocking the most obvious exit while appearing to simply be waiting for a table. Connor counted exits. Front door now guarded, kitchen entrance visible through the pass-through window, emergency exit near the restrooms that probably hadn't been opened in years and might set off alarms. His training automatically cataloged potential weapons within reach. Butter knives too dull to be useful. Coffee mugs that could serve as projectiles. Hot cooking oil from the kitchen if he could reach it. But with Zoe in the building, his options narrowed considerably. Whatever these men wanted, he couldn't risk his daughter becoming collateral damage in someone else's war. "Daddy," Zoe's voice carried across the diner, high and uncertain. She had noticed the new arrivals and sensed the shift in atmosphere that even children could detect when adults prepared for violence. Connor forced his expression into something resembling calm, offering her a smile that he hoped looked more convincing than it felt. "Just talking with some folks, sweetheart. Stay with Dolores." The waitress had positioned herself protectively near the child, her weathered hands resting on Zoe's shoulders with grandmotherly authority. Dolores had raised 4 sons and buried a husband who died in Vietnam. She recognized dangerous men when she saw them, and her eyes held the kind of steel that came from defending what mattered most. If things went bad, Connor trusted her to get Zoe to safety, even if it cost him everything else. Vincent checked his watch with theatrical precision, as if operating on a schedule that couldn't accommodate much more delay. "Miss Cross has something that belongs to my associates," he explained conversationally. "Evidence that could prove embarrassing to certain business arrangements. We've tried the polite approach, phone calls, letters, even a visit to her previous residence in Phoenix, but she seems to have developed an aversion to communication." Evelyn's breathing became more labored, and Connor noticed she kept glancing toward her purse, as if it contained something more significant than lipstick and house keys. Whatever these men wanted, she had it with her. The question was whether it was worth dying for, and whether Connor's involvement had already made that choice for all of them. The chess game was becoming clearer, even if he didn't understand all the pieces yet. "Maybe," Connor suggested, "the lady doesn't want to communicate because she's got good reasons to stay quiet." He was fishing for information, trying to understand the dynamics before committing to a course of action that might get innocent people killed. Vincent's laugh suggested that innocence was a luxury none of them could afford anymore. "Good reasons," he repeated. "Mr. Reeves, I don't think you understand the situation." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to ensure that only those directly involved could hear his next words. "Mr. Cross, or should I say Detective Martinez, has been conducting unauthorized surveillance on legitimate businessmen, the kind of surveillance that could be considered industrial espionage or even terrorism, depending on how creative federal prosecutors want to get with their charges." The name Martinez hit Connor like a physical blow. He'd heard that name before in briefings that had been classified above his clearance level, whispered in conversations between officers who thought enlisted personnel weren't listening. Detective Martinez. The pieces began forming a picture that Connor didn't want to see completed. If this woman was who Vincent claimed she was, then her presence in Cedar Falls wasn't coincidental. She was hunting something or someone, and her pursuit had led directly to Connor's quiet life with his daughter. The implications made his stomach clench with familiar dread, the same feeling he'd experienced in the seconds before IEDs detonated, when training and instinct screamed warnings that his conscious mind was still processing. "I think," he said slowly, "that you gentlemen need to leave now." But even as he spoke, Connor knew the time for peaceful resolution had passed. Vincent's expression had shifted from oily condescension to cold calculation, the look of a man who had decided that negotiation was no longer cost-effective. "Mr. Reeves," Vincent said, his voice carrying new authority, "you're going to sit down, finish your breakfast, and pretend this conversation never happened. Ms. Martinez is going to come with us for a private discussion about her recent activities, and your daughter is going to continue believing that her father is nothing more than a small-town carpenter with no connection to classified operations in foreign countries." The threat was elegantly constructed. Surrender Evelyn to save Zoe. Abandon a stranger to protect family. It was the kind of moral calculus that had defined Connor's military service, where impossible choices were presented as tactical necessities. But civilian life had softened him in some ways, hardened him in others. He was no longer willing to sacrifice individuals for abstract concepts of greater good, especially when those sacrifices were demanded by men who wore expensive suits and spoke in euphemisms about violence. "Counteroffer," Connor replied, his voice carrying the flat tone that had preceded firefights in places whose names never appeared on CNN. "You leave the lady alone, walk out of here, and forget you ever saw either of us. In return, I don't do things that might require lengthy explanations to local law enforcement." Vincent's companions shifted positions slightly, hands moving closer to concealed weapons. The mathematics of violence were becoming clearer. 5 armed men against 1 civilian with decades-old training, in a confined space with innocent bystanders and a child whose safety took priority over everything else. The odds were not encouraging. But Connor had faced worse odds in places where backup was days away and failure meant death for people who depended on him. The familiarity of impending combat was almost comforting, like finding an old tool that still fit perfectly in experienced hands. A strange calm settled over him, the kind of clarity that came only in moments when everything extraneous fell away, leaving only what mattered. Zoe mattered. The innocent people in this diner mattered. And somehow this woman, Martinez, Cross, whoever she was, mattered too, if only because she stood against men like Vincent Carmine. "This is ridiculous," Evelyn said suddenly, her voice steadier than it had been. "You have no authority here. I'm an FBI agent conducting an official investigation. These men are involved in human trafficking. Mr. Reeves, they prey on children." The revelation landed like a thunderclap in the small diner. Human trafficking. Children. The most vulnerable victims. The most unforgivable crime. Connor felt something shift inside him. Old moral certainties realigning with new information. Vincent's face hardened. "Agent Martinez is delusional. She's been pursuing a personal vendetta against legitimate businessmen because of family troubles. Very sad situation. Her superiors suspended her months ago, but she's gone rogue, fabricating evidence, harassing innocent people." "That's a lie," Martinez said, her hand drifting toward her purse again. "I have recorded proof. Vincent Carmine runs a network that specializes in trafficking children across state lines. I've been building a case against him for 2 years. Her voice caught for a moment, and Connor saw raw pain flash across her features. "Ever since they murdered my son to keep me quiet." The words hit Connor harder than any physical blow could have. A child murdered to silence a federal agent. The same kind of innocent life that men like him were supposed to protect, had sworn oaths to defend. Vincent sighed theatrically. "More delusions. Ms. Martinez suffered a tragic loss when her teenage son died of an overdose. Unfortunate, but hardly murder. She's been constructing conspiracy theories ever since, unable to accept that her own neglect as a parent might have contributed to the tragedy." The calculated cruelty of the statement made Connor's decision for him. Only a man capable of genuine evil could weaponize a parent's grief so casually. "Let me see if I understand the situation," Connor said, shifting his position slightly to place himself more directly between Vincent's men and Martinez. An FBI agent is investigating you for crimes against children. Instead of addressing this through legal channels, you track her to a small town and confront her with armed men in a public place on a Sunday morning. That sound about right? Vincent's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. You're making a mistake, Mr. Reeves. This woman is dangerous, unstable. What she has in her possession is stolen property that could compromise national security. We're simply here to recover it and ensure she gets the help she needs. National security, Connor repeated. Funny how that term shows up whenever powerful people are about to do something they don't want examined too closely. I heard it a lot in Afghanistan. The standoff had reached a critical juncture. Connor could feel the tension building toward inevitable violence. His priority had to be getting Zoe clear of whatever was about to happen. Evelyn made the choice for all of them. She lunged for her purse, fingers closing around something inside as Vincent's men reacted with professional speed. Chairs scattered as bodies moved, and Connor found himself calculating angles and distances with the automatic precision that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. Time dilated the way it always did when violence became inevitable. Sounds became sharper. Vision tunneled to essential details. Heartbeats settled into the steady rhythm that preceded controlled aggression. Zoe's scream from across the diner cut through everything else, and Connor's world narrowed to a single priority: protecting his daughter from the chaos about to engulf Mason's diner on what had started as just another peaceful Sunday morning in Cedar Falls, Ohio. The first gunshot shattered the Sunday morning stillness like a thunderclap in church. Martinez had moved with the practiced efficiency of someone trained in high-pressure situations, producing a service weapon from her purse in one fluid motion. But Vincent's men were professionals too, their reaction time measured in fractions of seconds. Connor was already in motion before his conscious mind registered the danger, muscle memory from combat zones taking over as he launched himself across the intervening space. He slammed into Martinez just as she fired, the impact sending her bullet high where it shattered a window instead of finding human flesh. They crashed to the floor together behind an overturned table as return fire splintered wood above their heads. "Stay down," Connor shouted toward the counter, where Dolores had pulled Zoe behind the relative safety of the industrial refrigerator. The old waitress didn't need the instruction. She had already positioned her body between the child and the gunfire, her weathered face set in grim determination. The diner erupted into chaos. The few remaining patrons scrambled for cover, diving beneath tables or flattening themselves against walls. An elderly man near the front counter froze in place, paralyzed by fear and confusion. His breakfast forgotten as bullets tore through the space where normalcy had existed seconds before. Vincent and his companions had taken strategic positions, using the booze as cover, while maintaining clear lines of fire toward Connor and Martinez. The two men who had been blocking the entrance now moved with tactical precision to secure the kitchen exit, effectively cutting off the most obvious escape routes. "Hell of a way to start a conversation," Connor muttered as he assessed their situation. The overturned table provided temporary cover, but the thin wood wouldn't stop determined bullets for long. They needed a better position. Martinez's expression was focused, her earlier fear replaced by professional detachment. "Sorry about this," she said, checking her weapon with practiced movements. "Wasn't planning on a firefight in front of civilians." Connor spotted a serving tray that had fallen nearby, heavy stainless steel, about 18 inches across. Not much, but better than nothing. He reached for it just as another volley of shots peppered their position, splinters flying as bullets punched through their improvised barricade. "We need to move," he said, nodding toward the kitchen. "They've got us pinned here, and this table won't hold much longer." Martinez nodded her agreement, understanding the tactical assessment without need for elaboration. "Cover and move?" "Just like the old days," Connor replied, though his old days had been very different from hers. He positioned the serving tray like a shield. "On three." They didn't need to count aloud. Both understood the rhythm of combat, the precise timing required for coordinated movement. Martinez fired two careful shots to force Vincent's men into cover, while Connor launched himself from behind the table, using the serving tray to deflect any incoming fire as he slid across the floor toward the counter that separated the dining area from the kitchen. A bullet ricocheted off the tray with a metallic ping, the impact numbing Connor's arm, but failing to penetrate the sturdy steel. He reached the counter and immediately provided covering fire for Martinez, using a coffee mug as a distraction, hurling it across the room where it shattered against the wall. The sound drew automatic fire from one of Vincent's men, revealing his position and allowing Martinez to sprint to Connor's side during the momentary distraction. They weren't fighting like movie heroes with unlimited ammunition and superhuman accuracy. This was the controlled chaos of real combat. Economical movements, split-second decisions, the use of environment and psychology rather than brute force. Connor's military training and Martinez's FBI tactical experience complemented each other in a deadly efficient partnership born of necessity. "Kitchen," Connor said, already moving toward the swinging doors. "We need to get to Zoe." They made it through the doors just as Vincent's men attempted to flank their position. The kitchen offered better cover, industrial appliances, metal countertops, multiple exit points. Dolores had already shepherded Zoe and the few remaining customers into the walk-in freezer, using the thick insulated door as protection against stray bullets. Connor made his way to them, checking Zoe for injuries with gentle, urgent hands. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" His voice remained steady despite the adrenaline surging through his system. Zoe nodded, eyes wide with fear, but remarkably composed for an 8-year-old suddenly thrust into violence. "I'm okay, Daddy." Her small fingers clutched his sleeve. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he assured her, though his shoulder ached where the bullet had struck the tray. "You stay here with Dolores. I'll be right back." Martinez had taken up a defensive position near the kitchen entrance, her weapon trained on the swinging doors. "They're regrouping," she reported, "probably trying to figure out how to come at us without walking into a crossfire." Connor joined her, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from a nearby hook. Not his preferred weapon, but effective at close range. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before they make a move," he estimated. "Time to figure out who you really are and what the hell is going on." Martinez met his gaze with a directness that confirmed his suspicions. She wasn't just some random FBI agent who'd stumbled into trouble. "My real name is Angela Rodriguez," she said, keeping her voice low. "I'm with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. Vincent Carmine runs one of the largest child trafficking networks on the East Coast, disguised as a legitimate import-export business." Connor processed this information with the same tactical efficiency he applied to combat situations. "And you're in Cedar Falls because?" "I tracked financial transactions to a bank in Columbus. Evidence suggested there might be a connection to smaller towns in the region." Her expression hardened. "I've been building a case against Carmine for 2 years, ever since—" She hesitated, and Connor saw raw pain flash across her face. "Since they killed my son," she finished, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Jamie. He was 12. The words hit Connor like physical blows. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this. "How?" Angela's eyes never left the kitchen doors, professional vigilance maintaining despite the personal nature of her revelation. "I was investigating disappearances along the I-70 corridor. Missing kids, mostly from vulnerable situations, foster care, homeless shelters, broken homes. The pattern led to one of Carmine's shell companies." She swallowed hard. "I didn't realize how close I was getting until they sent a warning. Came home one night to find my front door open. Jamie was— They made it look like an overdose. Talk screen showed fentanyl. My 12-year-old, who wouldn't even take aspirin without asking first." Connor felt cold fury building inside him. He'd seen many forms of evil during his military service, but few things matched the deliberate targeting of a child to silence a parent. "The Bureau pulled me off the case," Angela continued, "said I was too emotionally involved, that I was seeing conspiracies where there were only coincidences. But I kept digging on my own time. 6 months ago, I found a witness willing to testify, a girl who'd escaped one of Carmine's transport operations. The night before her deposition, she disappeared. That's when I knew someone in Sadie was compromised." "So you went off the grid," Connor supplied, understanding the logic. "New identity, small town, continue the investigation away from potential leaks." Angela nodded. "I have everything on this," she patted her jacket pocket. "Digital recordings of Carmine admitting to Jamie's murder, financial records linking him to trafficking operations in 6 states, names of corrupted officials. Enough to take down his entire network." The revelation created a moment of clarity for Connor. This wasn't just about surviving the immediate threat, it was about something larger. Exposing a system that preyed on the most vulnerable, bringing justice to victims who had no voice. The kind of battle he'd walked away from in Afghanistan, believing it too corrupted by power and money to fight effectively. Your turn, Angela said, interrupting his thoughts. Vincent mentioned Kandahar. What happened there that didn't make it into your service record? Connor's jaw tightened. Few people knew about Kandahar, and those who did generally didn't discuss it openly. The fact that Vincent had this information suggested connections that went beyond ordinary criminal networks. Supply chain investigation, he said tersely, started noticing discrepancies in equipment deliveries. Weapons that never reached our units showing up in enemy hands. Reconstruction funds disappearing into accounts that couldn't be traced. He paused, memories surfacing that he'd spent years trying to bury. I reported up the chain of command. 2 weeks later, my patrol was ambushed. 3 men died. The ambush team knew exactly where we'd be, down to the minute. Angela's expression shifted from professional interest to understanding. Inside job. Connor nodded. After I recovered from my injuries, I kept pushing. Found connections between certain officers and regional warlords who controlled opium production. Kickbacks, protection arrangements, all officially sanctioned as diplomatic necessities to maintain stability in the region. And when you wouldn't let it go? Honorable discharge with a recommendation that I seek treatment for PTSD and paranoid tendencies. His tone was matter-of-fact, but the bitterness lingered even after all these years. The message was clear. Some systems can't be reformed from within. Some battles can't be won by following the rules. Angela absorbed this information, recognition reflecting in her eyes. So you walked away, chose a different kind of life. Found purpose in what I could control, Connor corrected. Raising Zoe, building things that last, being part of a community where actions have direct consequences, where right and wrong aren't subject to political convenience. Their conversation was interrupted by movement in the dining area. Vincent's men were repositioning, preparing for another assault. Connor and Angela fell silent, listening to the subtle sounds that revealed tactical intentions, the soft scrape of furniture being moved, the whispered coordination between professionals. We need a better position, Connor murmured, scanning the kitchen for options. The walk-in freezer provided excellent protection but no escape route. The back door likely had at least one of Vincent's men covering it. As if reading his thoughts, Angela gestured toward a small window above the industrial sink. Service alley, tight fit, but possible. Connor assessed the opening. It would be a squeeze for him, but manageable. More concerning was the exposed position they'd be in during the climb and exit. We'd need a diversion, he said. Before they could develop a plan, the kitchen doors swung open violently. Connor reacted instantly, hurling the cast iron skillet with practiced accuracy. It caught the intruder squarely in the chest, sending him staggering backward with a grunt of pain. Angela fired a precise shot that forced a second attacker to retreat. The exchange lasted only seconds, but confirmed what Connor had already suspected. Vincent's team was professional and determined. They wouldn't be held off indefinitely with improvised weapons and limited ammunition. We're running out of options, Angela said, checking her weapon. I've got 5 rounds left. Connor made a decision. Get to the freezer, barricade with Zoe and the others. I'll create a diversion, try to draw them away from the kitchen. Angela looked at him sharply. That's suicide. Not planning to die today, Connor replied. Just need to buy time until local law enforcement responds. Gunfire in Cedar Falls on a Sunday morning? Someone's already called it in. And if Vincent has people in local law enforcement, small towns, limited resources, it's a common weakness his organization exploits. Connor shook his head. Not Sheriff Townsend, Vietnam vet, career law officer, incorruptible. He'll respond personally to shots fired, and he'll bring everyone he's got. A crash from the dining area suggested Vincent's men were growing impatient with the standoff. Time was running short. There's another option, Angela said, lowering her voice further. A controlled surrender. I offer the evidence in exchange for safe passage for the civilians. Once everyone's clear, including Zoe, we can worry about taking Vincent down through other channels. Connor understood the logic but saw the flaws immediately. He won't honor any agreement. The moment he has what he wants, we become liabilities to eliminate. Not if he believes there are backup copies that will automatically release to federal authorities if anything happens to us, Angela countered. It's a standard FBI protocol, dead man's switch for undercover operations. Is there one? Angela's hesitation told him everything. There could have been if I'd been operating officially, but this investigation was off books after they pulled me from the case. Connor nodded, understanding the implications. If they surrendered the evidence, there would be no second chance. Vincent would ensure both the evidence and its collectors disappeared permanently. Then we fight, he said simply. Hold position until backup arrives or we find an opening to evacuate. Angela accepted his decision with a short nod, the professional in her recognizing when debate became a luxury they couldn't afford. She moved to check on the civilians in the freezer while Connor gathered potential weapons from the kitchen. Knives, heavy pots, anything that could provide an advantage in close quarters. When she returned, her expression had changed. There was a new determination in her eyes, a resolve that went beyond professional duty. Zoe asked if you were coming back, she said quietly. She's scared but trying to be brave for you. Connor felt his throat tighten. What did you tell her? That her dad is the kind of man who always finds a way home. Angela met his gaze directly. Don't make me a liar, Reeves. The simple statement carried more weight than elaborate speeches could have. It wasn't just about surviving the immediate threat anymore. It was about the promise he'd made to Zoe since Iwara's death, that he would always be there, that some constants remained in a world of uncertainties. We'll both make it back, Connor assured her, though they both recognized the optimism for what it was, a necessary fiction in the face of grim odds. Vincent's voice suddenly carried through from the dining area, his tone conversational despite the violence that had preceded it. Agent Rodriguez, Mr. Reeves, this situation has become unnecessarily complicated. Perhaps we can find a more civilized approach to resolving our differences. Connor and Angela exchanged glances, neither trusting the sudden shift in tactics. I'm listening, Angela called back, positioning herself where she could see through the small window in the kitchen door without exposing herself to potential fire. I have a proposition that might benefit us all, Vincent continued. You've put me in a rather awkward position. Gunfire tends to attract attention, even in sleepy little towns. Local law enforcement will be arriving soon, I imagine. Connor saw Angela's expression tighten. They both knew what Vincent was implying. When police arrived, the situation would become even more volatile, with civilians and officers at risk in the crossfire. What do you want? Angela demanded. A simple exchange. You hand over the evidence you've been collecting, and everyone walks away. Mr. Reeves returns to his charming life of woodworking and single parenthood. The civilians go home with an exciting story to tell, and you get a head start before my associates catch up with you again, which they inevitably will, but that's tomorrow's problem. Angela's knuckles whitened around her weapon. And if I refuse? Vincent's sigh was theatrically exaggerated. Then I start making examples of the civilians still in the dining area, beginning with this distinguished-looking gentleman enjoying his retirement breakfast. Connor's stomach clenched. The elderly man he'd noticed earlier must have been scarier. Vincent must have taken him hostage during the confusion. You have 30 seconds to decide, Vincent added. The evidence for the old man's life. Seems like a reasonable trade. Angela turned to Connor, conflict evident in her eyes. 2 years of work, she whispered. Everything I need to take down the people who killed my son. But I can't let another innocent person die because of my fight. Connor understood her dilemma all too well. It mirrored the impossible choices he'd faced after Kandahar. Justice versus immediate lives at risk. Abstract principles versus concrete suffering. He remembered the aftermath, the slow realization that the corruption he'd uncovered went deeper than he'd initially believed. The gradual understanding that some enemies couldn't be defeated through conventional channels. There's another way, he said slowly, an idea forming, but it's risky. Angela listened intently as Connor outlined his plan, a gambit that relied on psychology rather than firepower, on Vincent's own priorities rather than their limited resources. It could work, she acknowledged when he finished, but it puts you at significant risk. No worse than what we're already facing, Connor pointed out, and it gives us a chance to protect both the civilians and your evidence. Angela studied him for a moment. then nodded decisively. Let's do it. Lunch, and as they finalized the details, Connor made his way to the freezer where Zoe and the others were huddled. He knelt beside his daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead with gentle fingers. I need to go talk to the bad men, he told her, keeping his voice steady and reassuring despite the gravity of what he was about to attempt. You stay here with Dolores and the others until I come back. Zoe's eyes, so like her mother's, searched his face with a perceptiveness beyond her years. Are you scared, Daddy? The simple question deserved an honest answer. Yes, sweetheart, I am. But remember what we talked about? About being brave? Being brave isn't not being scared, she recited solemnly. It's doing what's right even when you are scared. That's exactly right, Connor said, his chest tightening with pride and fear in equal measure. And right now, the brave thing is for me to help Agent Rodriguez stop these men from hurting anyone else. Zoe nodded, accepting his explanation with the trust that had defined their relationship since her birth. I'll be brave too, she promised. I know you will. Connor pressed a kiss to her forehead, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her small hand in his. I love you more than anything in this world. I love you too, Daddy. Dolores moved closer, her weathered hand coming to rest on Zoe's shoulder with grandmotherly authority. I'll keep her safe, she assured Connor, the steel in her voice leaving no room for doubt. You do what you need to do. Connor nodded gratefully, then turned to the other civilians, an elderly couple, a middle-aged man who'd been reading the Sunday paper when violence erupted, a young woman who'd been working on a laptop before the shooting started. Stay quiet and keep low, he instructed them. Help is coming. Returning to Angela, he found her checking her weapon one final time. Ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. Connor took a deep breath, centering himself the way he'd done before combat operations. Let's do this. Vincent, he called toward the dining area. I'm coming out to talk. Hold your fire. A wise decision, Vincent called back. Connor emerged from the kitchen with his hands raised, moving slowly to demonstrate he carried no weapons. The dining area had been transformed by violence. Overturned tables, shattered windows, bullet holes punctuating walls that had previously displayed only local sports memorabilia and faded photographs of Cedar Falls landmarks. Vincent stood near the counter, one hand resting casually on the shoulder of the elderly man who sat rigid with fear. Three of his men maintained tactical positions around the room, weapons ready but not actively aimed at Connor. The fourth was nowhere to be seen, probably watching the back exit, Connor surmised. Mr. Reeves, Vincent greeted him with the false cordiality of a salesman. I appreciate your willingness to be reasonable. Where is Agent Rodriguez? Securing the civilians, Connor replied, keeping his voice neutral. Including my daughter. Vincent nodded as if this was perfectly understandable. Family must always come first. I'm sure you understand that my actions today, regrettable as they may seem, are also about protection. In my case, protecting business interests that support many families. Connor felt disgust rise in his throat at the man's casual equation of child trafficking with legitimate business, but he maintained his composed exterior. Let's cut the philosophical debate. You want the evidence Agent Rodriguez has collected. Precisely. And you are willing to threaten innocent people to get it. Vincent spread his hands in a gesture of mock helplessness. Business requires leverage, Mr. Reeves. Surely you understand that from your military experience. Sometimes collateral damage is unavoidable when pursuing strategic objectives. Connor moved closer, hands still raised but posture shifting subtly to what combat veterans would recognize as pre-engagement positioning. There's a problem with your strategy, Vincent. You're assuming the hostage approach gives you leverage over me. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Vincent's face. You would allow this man to die? I find that difficult to believe given your service record. My service record taught me to recognize bluffs, Connor replied. You won't kill anyone in cold blood right before the police arrive. Too messy, too many witnesses, too much physical evidence. That's not how men like you operate. You prefer others to do your dirty work, maintain plausible deniability. Vincent's expression hardened. You're gambling with someone else's life, Mr. Reeves. No, Connor countered. I'm calling your bluff. You want to trade? Here's my counteroffer. He reached slowly into his pocket and produced a small object. Not Angela's digital recorder, but a USB flash drive that had been in his wallet, containing family photos and workshop designs. Vincent wouldn't know the difference until it was too late. This is what you want. Everything Agent Rodriguez has collected on your operation. Vincent's eyes fixed on the device with naked greed. A sensible decision. But, Connor continued, I want all civilians released first. The old man, the other customers, my daughter, everyone. They walk out the front door, and then you get this. Vincent considered the proposal, clearly calculating odds and outcomes. How do I know that's the only copy of whatever evidence she's collected? You don't, Connor admitted, but it's the only copy you're going to get a chance at today. And destroying this buys you time to clean up any loose ends before she can reconstruct her case. The logic was sound, and Vincent recognized it. He nodded to one of his men. Check the kitchen, escort the civilians out, except for Agent Rodriguez. She stays. Connor tensed. All civilians, including my daughter. Of course, Vincent agreed smoothly. Children should never be involved in adult disputes. The next few minutes proceeded with tense efficiency. Vincent's man escorted the small group of terrified customers from their hiding places toward the front door. Dolores emerged from the freezer leading Zoe by the hand, her other arm supporting an elderly woman who seemed on the verge of collapse. Connor felt his heart constrict at the sight of his daughter's pale face. Her eyes found his immediately, fear and confusion warring with the absolute trust that had defined their relationship since her birth. He wanted to go to her, to sweep her into his arms and carry her far from this shattered sanctuary. But he maintained his position. Any sudden movement might trigger the violence he was trying to prevent. It's okay, sweetheart, he called to her. Go with Dolores. I'll be right behind you. Zoe hesitated, her innate perceptiveness recognizing the lie in his reassurance. Promise. The simple word carried the weight of all their shared history, bedtime stories and bandaged knees, whispered confidences and fierce hugs after nightmares. Connor felt his throat tighten. I promise I'll do everything I can to come back to you, he answered truthfully. Remember what we talked about? About being brave? Zoe nodded solemnly. Being brave isn't not being scared. It's doing what's right even when you are scared. That's my girl, Connor said, pouring all his love into the three simple words. Now go with Dolores. Be brave for me. As the civilians filed past Vincent toward the door, Connor noticed Angela was not among them. She had remained hidden, probably recognizing that Vincent would never let her walk away. Their eyes met briefly through the kitchen window, a silent communication passing between them. She understood his plan, or at least part of it. Vincent waited until the last civilian had exited before turning his attention back to Connor. Now, Mr. Reeves, the evidence, if you please. Connor held up the flash drive. First, tell your man watching the back door to come in here. I want everyone where I can see them. Vincent raised an eyebrow but signaled to one of his men, who spoke briefly into a communication device. Moments later, the fourth man entered from the kitchen. Satisfied? Vincent asked. Not yet, Connor replied. I want your word that once you have this, you'll leave Cedar Falls and never return. No reprisals against anyone in town, no further interest in me or my daughter. Vincent smiled thinly. You have my word as a businessman. Connor knew the promise was worthless, but he needed to maintain the pretense of negotiation. He stepped forward, holding out the flash drive. Then we have a deal. As Vincent reached for the device, Connor detected a subtle shift in the air pressure, the back door of the kitchen opening slightly. Angela was making her move, just as they'd planned. Vincent's fingers closed around the flash drive just as Connor released it. For a fraction of a second, their hands touched, and Connor saw recognition flash in Vincent's eyes. The realization that he had miscalculated, that the ex-Ranger hadn't surrendered but had maneuvered him into position. Connor struck with practiced efficiency, grabbing Vincent's wrist and twisting it in a joint lock that sent waves of paralyzing pain up the older man's arm. In the same motion, he pulled Vincent into a human shield position just as his men raised their weapons. Drop them, Connor ordered, applying pressure that made Vincent gasp, or I break something your expensive surgeons can't fix. The standoff lasted only seconds before Angela burst through the kitchen doors, her weapon trained on Vincent's men with unwavering precision. Federal agent, weapons down now! The tactical situation had reversed completely. Vincent's men found themselves caught in a crossfire, their leader effectively neutralized as a hostage himself. Professional calculation overtook loyalty, and they slowly lowered their weapons. "Kick them away," Angela instructed, moving to secure the nearest gunman. "Face down on the floor, hands behind your heads." Connor maintained his hold on Vincent, who had stopped struggling once he realized the futility of resistance. "You planned this all along," Vincent said, his voice strained but controlled. "The recorder was a diversion." "Not entirely," Connor replied. "It is the evidence that will destroy you. I just needed you focused on it rather than on where Agent Rodriguez was." As Angela efficiently secured Vincent's men with zip ties she'd apparently had in her jacket pocket, Connor heard sirens in the distance. Someone, probably Dolores, had called the local police once the civilians were safely outside. Vincent chuckled despite his uncomfortable position. "You think this is over? Local police won't hold me for an hour. My lawyers will have me released before your daughter finishes her interrupted breakfast." Connor increased pressure on the joint lock just enough to send fresh pains shooting through Vincent's arm. "You're not dealing with just local police anymore. This has escalated far beyond Cedar Falls." Angela approached, keeping her weapon trained on Vincent. "He's right. I've already transmitted key evidence to secure FBI servers. Even if you destroyed this recorder, there are now multiple copies in federal hands. It's over, Vincent." The lie was delivered with perfect conviction. So perfect that even Connor might have believed it if he hadn't known the truth. The evidence existed only in the original recorder that Angela had kept hidden throughout the confrontation. But Vincent had no way of knowing that. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vincent's composed features. "You're bluffing. There's been no time." "Dead man's switch," Angela interrupted. "Set up months ago. If I didn't enter a code every 24 hours, everything I'd collected would automatically upload to multiple secure locations. When the shooting started, I deliberately missed my check-in." She smiled coldly. "You should have just kept looking for me quietly instead of creating this public spectacle. Your theatrics just triggered the contingency I designed specifically for men like you who think they're untouchable." The sirens grew louder, multiple vehicles by the sound of it. Cedar Falls might be small, but its police force responded with serious commitment to reports of gunfire. "It's over," Connor reiterated, maintaining his hold, as Angela moved in to secure Vincent. "Your network is exposed, your protection compromised, your operations under federal scrutiny." Vincent's face remained impassive, but his eyes revealed the rapid calculations of a man accustomed to finding escape routes from difficult situations. "Perhaps this particular battle," he conceded. "But men like me are never truly defeated, Mr. Reeves. We adapt, rebuild, continue under new frameworks. The demand for our services never disappears, only evolves." Connor leaned closer, his voice dropping to ensure only Vincent could hear his next words. "If you or anyone connected to you ever comes near my daughter or this town again, there won't be any evidence, any witnesses, or any remains for your expensive lawyers to defend." That's not a threat. It's a promise from someone who knows how to make people disappear without a trace. He released Vincent as Angela secured the final restraint, stepping back just as the first police officers burst through the diner's shattered front door, weapons drawn. Sheriff Mike Townsend led the response team, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. "Connor, you okay?" Connor nodded, suddenly aware of the accumulated injuries from the brief but intense conflict. Bruised ribs, strained shoulder, various cuts from flying debris. Nothing serious, but his body was beginning to register complaints now that the immediate danger had passed. "Agent Angela Rodriguez, FBI." Angela introduced herself, producing credentials that had remained hidden during her time as Evelyn Cross. "These men are under arrest for multiple federal violations, including human trafficking, conspiracy, assault on a federal officer, and attempted murder." Mike's expression registered surprise, but his professionalism quickly reasserted itself. "Cedar Falls Police will provide whatever assistance the Bureau requires, Agent Rodriguez." As additional officers secured the scene and began processing the prisoners, Connor moved toward the door, his mind focused entirely on reaching Zoe. He found her outside, still clutching Dolores's hand, her small face lighting up with relief when she saw him emerge. "Daddy!" She broke away from the waitress and ran to him, colliding with his legs in a fierce hug that disregarded his various injuries. Connor knelt and gathered her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling the rapid flutter of her heart against his chest. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered against his neck. "I was brave, just like you said." "The bravest," Connor agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Braver than any soldier I ever served with." As he held his daughter, Connor felt the weight of the morning's events settling onto his shoulders. The violence had been contained, the immediate threat neutralized, but the ripple effects would continue. Vincent's cryptic warning echoed in his mind. Men like him were never truly defeated, only temporarily inconvenienced. Zoe pulled back slightly, her young face serious as she studied her father's expression. "Are the bad men going to jail?" Connor nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, for a very long time." "Good," she said with the simple moral certainty of childhood. "They scared everyone and ruined our pancakes." Despite everything, Connor found himself smiling at her priorities. "We can make more pancakes at home." "With chocolate chips?" Zoe negotiated, already showing signs of recovering from the trauma with the resilience unique to children. "Definitely with chocolate chips," Connor agreed, rising to his feet with Zoe still in his arms, unwilling to break physical contact just yet. Angela approached them, having handed off custody of Vincent and his men to the local officers. Her professional demeanor had softened slightly as she watched the reunion between father and daughter. "Thank you," she said simply. "What you did in there, most civilians would have looked the other way." Connor shook his head. "I stopped being most civilians a long time ago, same as you." Angela glanced at Zoe, who was watching her with undisguised curiosity. "I'm sorry your family got caught in my fight." "Not your fault," Connor assured her. "Vincent made his choices. We just responded." Zoe looked between them. "Are you a real FBI agent? Like in the movies?" Angela smiled, the expression transforming her face from hardened professional to something warmer, more human. "Real FBI agent, but not much like the movies. We don't have car chases and explosions every day. Just on Sundays at breakfast," Connor added dryly. A comfortable silence fell between them, the shared experience of survival creating a bond that transcended their brief acquaintance. Angela finally broke it, nodding toward the growing law enforcement presence. "I need to make some calls, get a federal response team out here." Vincent wasn't exaggerating about his connections. "We need to move quickly before anyone can interfere with the case." Connor understood. The next few hours would be critical for preserving the evidence and securing the prisoners before Vincent's influence could be brought to bear. "What can we do to help?" he asked. Angela considered this. "Statements might eventually, but first get Zoe somewhere safe and comfortable. She's been through enough today." Zoe, still in Connor's arms, looked at Angela with sudden intensity. "Are you going to stay in Cedar Falls now? Since the bad men know who you are, you don't have to be Evelyn anymore." The question caught Angela off guard. She glanced at Connor, then back to Zoe. "I haven't thought that far ahead yet. There will be a lot of work to do with this case." "You could have pancakes with us sometime," Zoe offered with the straightforward hospitality of childhood. "Daddy makes really good ones, even better than Mason's Diner." Connor felt a smile tug at his lips despite the circumstances. "The invitation stands," he told Angela. "Once things settle down." Something flickered in Angela's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the recognition of a possible future she hadn't allowed herself to consider while focused on her mission. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Thank you." As more law enforcement vehicles arrived and the investigation began in earnest, Connor carried Zoe toward his truck, eager to get her home to the safety and familiarity of their house on Maple Street. The Sunday morning ritual of pancakes and conversation had been irrevocably disrupted, but they were alive together, and for now, that was enough. He glanced back once to see Angela conferring with Sheriff Townsend, her posture straight, her gestures precise as she outlined what needed to happen next. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and Connor felt an unexpected connection. Two warriors who had found themselves fighting the same battle from different starting points. Whatever came next would be complicated. Vincent's arrest would trigger investigations, formal statements, possibly court appearances. The quiet life Connor had built in Cedar Falls had been fundamentally altered. But as he settled Zoe into her booster seat and secured the safety belt, he realized that perhaps the time for quiet had passed. Some battles couldn't be won from inside the system. Some required people willing to stand in the gap, to place themselves between predators and their prey, to say wrong table, wrong day, when evil came calling. As he started the engine and pulled away from Mason's diner, Connor found himself ready for whatever battle came next. The days following the shootout at Mason's diner unfolded in a blur of federal agents, formal statements, and community response. Cedar Falls, unaccustomed to violence more serious than the occasional barroom scuffle, found itself thrust into the national spotlight as details of Vincent Carmine's trafficking network emerged. FBI teams descended on the small town, setting up temporary command posts in the community center and conducting interviews with everyone who had witnessed the Sunday morning confrontation. Connor kept Zoe home from school for the first few days, providing a protective buffer between his daughter and the inevitable questions from classmates and teachers. They spent quiet hours in his workshop, where the familiar rhythm of tools against wood created a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. Zoe sat on her designated stool, sanding small pieces for a dollhouse Connor had been building as a Christmas present, asking occasional questions about what would happen to the bad men and when things would go back to normal. "Will Agent Rodriguez have to leave soon?" she asked on the third afternoon, her small hands moving mechanically over the wooden roof shingle she was smoothing. Connor looked up from the dovetail joint he was cutting. "Probably once all the paperwork is finished and the investigation moves to the courts." Zoe frowned, considering this. "I like her. She's brave, like you." "Well, she is brave," Connor agreed, setting down his chisel and giving his daughter his full attention. "Braver than most people I've known." "She lost her little Bundy," Zoe said quietly. "Dolores told me. That's sad." Connor nodded, unsurprised that the diner's waitress had picked up details during the aftermath. Dolores had become a surrogate grandmother to Zoe after Sarah's death, offering childcare when Connor had projects that ran late and providing the feminine guidance that he sometimes struggled to provide. "Very sad," he confirmed. "Agent Rodriguez has been trying to catch the people responsible for a long time." Zoe's expression grew serious, her eyes, so like her mother's, focusing intently on Connor's face. "Like how that drunk driver hurt Mommy and the judge didn't put him in jail for very long?" The question caught Connor off guard. They had discussed Sarah's death in age-appropriate terms over the years, but he hadn't realized Zoe had absorbed so much about the judicial outcome. "Something like that," he acknowledged carefully. "Sometimes the system doesn't work the way it should." Zoe nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already concluded. "That's why you helped her, even though it was dangerous." It wasn't a question, but Connor answered anyway. "Yes, sometimes we have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard or scary." "I'm glad you did," Zoe said with the simple moral certainty of childhood. "Mommy would be proud of you." The words pierced Connor's carefully maintained composure. He set down his tools and crossed the workshop to gather Zoe into a tight embrace, sawdust and all. "Thank you, sweetheart," he whispered against her hair. "That means everything to me." Their moment was interrupted by a knock at the workshop door. Connor looked up to see Angela Rodriguez standing in the doorway, her professional FBI attire replaced by casual jeans and a simple blue sweater that softened her appearance considerably. "Sorry to intrude," she said, hesitating at the threshold. "Sheriff Townsend told me where to find you." Connor motioned her in. "Not intruding. We were just finishing up for the day." Zoe brightened at the sight of the agent. "Are you here for pancakes? Daddy said we could make them for you sometime." Angela smiled, the expression transforming her face from its usual guarded professionalism to something warmer, more accessible. "Not today, I'm afraid. I'm actually here to update your dad on some developments in the case." "Boring grown-up stuff," Zoe concluded with dramatic disappointment. "Very boring," Angela confirmed seriously. "All about paperwork and court schedules and evidence processing." Connor wiped his hands on a shop towel. "Zoe, why don't you go inside and wash up? I'll be in shortly to start dinner." With minimal protest, Zoe gathered her project materials and headed toward the house, pausing at the door to deliver a solemn invitation. "You can come for pancakes tomorrow if you want. Sunday is actually pancake day, but Daddy says we can have them any time after what happened." Once Zoe had disappeared into the house, Angela's expression shifted back to its professional intensity. "Vincent Carmine was transported to federal custody this morning. His men are being held separately to prevent coordination of their stories." Connor nodded. "Good. The evidence is secure. Everything I collected over the past 2 years, plus what we gathered from the scene. It's compelling, Connor. Financial records, witness statements, digital recordings of conversations implicating Vincent and several high-level associates in trafficking operations across 6 states. Enough for convictions? Angela's expression hardened. Enough to put Vincent and his immediate circle away for multiple life sentences. But there are others, people whose names appear in financial transactions, but with layers of protection. Shell companies, offshore accounts, intermediaries who maintain plausible deniability. The ones who never get their hands dirty, Connor supplied, familiar with the type from his Kandahar investigations. The ones the system protects. Exactly. Angela moved further into the workshop, running her fingers absently along the edge of a half-finished table. That's partly why I'm here. I need your testimony about what happened at the diner, but also about Vincent's knowledge of your military service, specifically Kandahar. Connor felt his shoulders tense. What does Kandahar have to do with a child trafficking case? Possibly nothing, Angela admitted. But Vincent's specific knowledge of classified details suggests connections to intelligence sources that shouldn't be accessible to civilian criminal organizations. I'm trying to map the full extent of his network, including potential government or military contacts. The implication hung in the air between them, that the corruption Connor had discovered years ago might connect to the crimes Angela was investigating now, that the system's failures weren't isolated incidents, but patterns of protection for those with sufficient power and influence. I'll tell you everything I know, Connor promised, but I doubt it will lead where you hope. The people involved in Kandahar were very good at covering their tracks. So am I, Angela replied with quiet confidence. 2 years undercover, building this case piece by piece when my own agency wanted me to let it go. I don't give up easily, especially when children's lives are at stake. Connor recognized the determination in her voice, the same resolve that had driven him to pursue the truth in Afghanistan despite warnings and threats, the same commitment that had later focused on creating a stable life for Zoe after Sarah's death. It was the certainty of purpose that defined people who had found their essential battles, who understood what they were willing to fight for regardless of cost. What happens next, he asked. Federal prosecutors are preparing indictments. I've been temporarily reassigned to the case in an official capacity now that my unauthorized investigation has produced actionable evidence. A hint of satisfaction crossed her features. Turns out it's harder to dismiss an agent as emotionally compromised when she delivers a major trafficking network on a silver platter. How long will you be in Cedar Falls? Another week, maybe 2. There are loose ends to tie up here before the case moves to federal courts in Columbus. She hesitated, then added, after that, I'm not sure. The Bureau has suggested a transfer, new assignment, fresh start. They're suddenly very interested in my valuable investigative instincts. There was irony in her tone, but also a question that remained unspoken. Connor found himself wanting to address it directly, though he wasn't entirely sure what answer he was prepared to offer. Zoe would be disappointed if you left without having those pancakes, he said instead, testing the waters with safer conversation. Angela smiled slightly. I wouldn't want to disappoint Zoe. Neither would I, Connor agreed, holding her gaze a moment longer than necessary. She's lost enough people in her life already. The implication wasn't subtle, and Angela didn't pretend to misunderstand it. And you, she asked directly, would you be disappointed if I left? Connor considered the question honestly. He barely knew this woman, had met her under extraordinary circumstances that revealed character, but not the everyday realities that define compatibility. Yet there was an undeniable connection between them, a recognition of shared experiences, similar wounds, common values. Yes, he admitted finally. I think I would be. Angela nodded, accepting his answer without pressing for elaborations he wasn't ready to provide. Then I'll definitely stay for pancakes before I make any decisions about transfers. The moment was interrupted by Zoe calling from the house, announcing that she was hungry and wondering when dinner would be ready. Connor smiled apologetically. Parent duty calls, he said. Would you like to join us? Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread. I'd like that, Angela replied, her professional reserve softening further. If you're sure it's not an imposition. Not at all, Connor assured her. Fair warning, though, Zoe will interrogate you about FBI procedures and whether you have a badge and gun like the agents on TV. I think I can handle her questioning techniques, Angela said with mock seriousness. I've been trained in resistance to interrogation after all. For the first time since the chaos at Mason's diner, Connor felt himself truly smile. Not the reassuring expression he maintained for Zoe's benefit, but a genuine response to unexpected connection in the aftermath of violence. Whatever came next would be complicated, but for tonight, spaghetti with his daughter and this fascinating, damaged, determined woman seemed like a perfect next step. As they walked toward the house together, Connor glanced back at his workshop, the place where broken things became whole again through patience and skill, where chaos transformed into order under capable hands. Perhaps people weren't so different from his woodworking projects. Perhaps some damage could be repaired, some wounds could heal, some broken pieces could find new purpose when joined with others that fit just right. It was, he thought, worth finding out. The federal response to Vincent Carmine's arrest had been swift and coordinated. Within hours of the standoff at Mason's diner, FBI tactical teams had secured the scene, evidence had been properly documented and collected, and all 5 suspects had been transported to separate holding facilities to prevent collusion. Angela had been temporarily reinstated to her official capacity, her 2-year off-books investigation suddenly legitimized by the volume and quality of evidence she'd gathered. For 3 days, Cedar Falls had buzzed with activity unprecedented in the town's quiet history. Federal agents conducting interviews, forensic teams processing the bullet-riddled diner, media vans parked along Main Street hoping to catch footage of the small-town carpenter who'd helped bring down a major trafficking network. Connor had kept Zoe home from school, protecting her from both unwanted attention and the lingering trauma of what she'd witnessed. They'd settled into a cautious routine. Mornings in the workshop, where the familiar rhythm of tools against wood provided therapeutic stability. Afternoons watching movies or playing board games. Evenings spent rebuilding their sense of normalcy, one quiet dinner at a time. Angela had become a regular visitor, stopping by each evening to update Connor on the investigation's progress and to spend time with Zoe, whose natural resilience and curiosity had quickly overcome any initial shyness. The 3 of them had fallen into an unexpected pattern of comfortable domesticity that none had anticipated but all seemed to welcome. On the 4th morning after the incident, Connor woke before dawn, restless from dreams of gunfire and splintering wood. He moved quietly through the house to avoid waking Zoe, settling at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee as pale light began filtering through the windows. The house phone rang, an unusual occurrence at 5:30 a.m. "Reeves," he answered, keeping his voice low. "It's Angela." Her tone immediately set off warning signals, tense, professional, none of the warmth that had characterized their recent interactions. "We have a problem. Vincent's being transferred to the federal courthouse in Columbus this morning for arraignment. The transport team just reported their vehicle was rammed by a truck at a rural intersection about 20 miles outside Cedar Falls." Connor felt his muscles tighten, combat instincts instantly awakening. "Vincent?" "Gone, along with 2 of his men. The federal marshals are alive but injured. This was a professional extraction, Connor. Military precision, exact intelligence on the transport route and timing. The evidence? Secure at FBI headquarters. But without Vincent, the case against his higher-level associates becomes much harder to prosecute." Connor processed this information with the tactical efficiency ingrained through years of special operations training. "He'll come for you. The evidence is useless without your testimony to authenticate it." "I know." Angela's voice was steady despite the implicit threat. "But there's more. They found photos in the transport vehicle, surveillance photos of your house, Zoe's school, your workshop. They were going to use them to pressure Vincent into revealing his high-level contacts." Connor's blood turned to ice. "They know where we live." "Yes, I've already dispatched a protective team, but they're coming from Columbus. ETA 45 minutes. The professional detachment in Angela's voice cracked slightly. "Connor, I'm so sorry. I never meant for Zoe to be in danger." "Not your fault," he replied automatically, mind already calculating options, escape routes, defensive positions. "But we can't wait 45 minutes. Vincent's people could already be en route." "I'm 10 minutes out," Angela said. Stay put, secure your location, wait for me. Connor ended the call and moved swiftly through the house, pulling a duffel bag from the hall closet. Inside was a contingency kit he'd assembled after Sarah's death. Emergency cash, spare ID documents, first aid supplies, a few survival essentials. The habits of military preparedness had never fully left him, though he'd hoped never to need these precautions in his civilian life. He hesitated at the gun safe hidden behind a false panel in his bedroom closet. The Beretta M9 inside, legally registered, properly secured, was a remnant of his former life, maintained but unused since settling in Cedar Falls. Connor unlocked the safe with practiced movements, checked the weapon, and secured it in a concealed holster. "Daddy?" Zoe stood in the doorway, sleep-rumpled and confused. "Why are you up so early? Is something wrong?" Connor forced a reassuring smile. "Nothing to worry about, sweetheart. Agent Rodriguez is coming over for an early breakfast. We need to be ready when she gets here." Zoe's perceptive eyes narrowed slightly. "You're wearing your serious face. The one when something bad is happening, but you don't want to tell me." The observation was so accurate that Connor felt a surge of pride despite the circumstances. He knelt to her level, knowing that lies would only undermine the trust they had built. "You remember the bad men from the diner?" he asked gently. Zoe nodded, her expression solemn. "The ones Agent Rodriguez arrested." "Some of them got away," Connor explained, keeping his voice steady. "They might be looking for Agent Rodriguez, so we're going to go somewhere safe for a little while, like a surprise vacation." "Are they looking for us too?" Zoe asked, the question painfully direct. Connor hesitated, balancing honesty against the need to prevent unnecessary fear. "They might be, but I won't let anything happen to you. Neither will Agent Rodriguez." Zoe absorbed this information with remarkable composure. "Should I pack Mr. Whiskers?" she asked, referring to the stuffed cat that had been her constant companion since Sarah's death. "Definitely," Connor confirmed. "And some clothes. Just what fits in your school backpack, okay? We need to travel light." As Zoe went to gather her things, Connor quickly packed a bag for himself, mind continuing to assess options. Angela would arrive soon, but Vincent's team could be anywhere. The protective detail was still too far away to rely upon. They needed to move to get Zoe to safety before the sound of tires on gravel interrupted his thoughts. Moving to the front window, Connor saw Angela's bureau-issued SUV pulling into the driveway. Relief washed through him, immediately followed by renewed vigilance. If Vincent's people had been monitoring Angela, they might have followed her here. He scanned the road beyond the property, empty in both directions. The surrounding woods showed no signs of movement. Perhaps they had a small window of opportunity. Angela approached the house with the wary efficiency of someone who understood the danger. Connor met her at the door, ushering her inside quickly. "Clear on approach," she reported. "But they could be anywhere. We need to move fast." "Zoe's packing. Where's the nearest safe house?" "Columbus FBI field office. About 90 minutes from here." Angela checked her weapon, a standard-issue Glock that seemed incongruous against the casual jeans and sweater she wore. "I've been trying to reach Sheriff Townsend for local backup, but he's not responding." The implication hung between them. Either the local police were deliberately being kept out of the loop, or something had happened to prevent their response. Neither option was reassuring. "My truck's in the garage," Connor said. "Tinted windows, less conspicuous than your bureau vehicle." Angela nodded agreement. "We'll take it. I've got a tactical vest in my car. It's size for me, but you should wear it. You're a higher value target if they're watching." Before Connor could argue, Zoe emerged from her room, backpack slung over one shoulder, Mr. Whiskers clutched in her arms. "I'm ready," she announced with determined bravery. Angela knelt in front of her. "Hey there, tough stuff. Looks like we're having an adventure today instead of pancakes." "Daddy says we're going somewhere safe," Zoe replied, her eyes seeking confirmation from both adults. "That's right," Angela assured her. "I know some people who are really good at keeping others safe. They're excited to meet you." The casual normalcy of the conversation belied the tension vibrating through both Connor and Angela. They were moving toward the garage when Connor's combat instincts flared. A subtle change in air pressure, the faintest sound of movement outside the kitchen window. "Down!" he shouted, lunging toward Zoe as the window exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the kitchen as Connor shielded his daughter with his body. Angela reacted instantly, drawing her weapon and returning fire toward the source of the attack. The peaceful morning erupted into chaos as bullets splintered wood and shattered the remaining windows. "Bathroom," Connor directed, half carrying Zoe toward the small interior room with no windows. "Lock the door. Get in the tub. Stay low." Zoe's eyes were wide with terror, but she nodded, running as directed while Angela provided covering fire. Connor retrieved his Beretta, joining Angela in defensive positions flanking the shattered window. "At least 3 hostiles," Angela reported tersely. "Professional tactics, military-grade weapons." "Vincent's not wasting time," Connor observed, firing a carefully placed shot that sent one attacker scrambling for better cover. "We're outnumbered and outgunned." Angela's expression hardened. "But not outmatched. I've called for immediate backup, but they won't get here in time," Connor finished. "We need to get Zoe out now." A new voice called from outside, calm and conversational despite the violence. "Agent Rodriguez, Mr. Reeves, this situation has become unnecessarily complicated." Connor recognized the voice with a chill. Not Vincent himself, but his second-in-command, the stocky man with scarred knuckles who had flanked Vincent at the diner, the one whose stance had suggested extensive close-quarters combat experience. "My name is Walsh," the voice continued. "Mr. Carmine sends his regards and a proposition. The evidence for your lives. Simple, clean, everyone walks away." "Except the children your organization traffics," Angela replied, her voice carrying easily through the shattered window. "Not interested in your proposition, Walsh." "Perhaps I failed to make the stakes clear," Walsh responded with exaggerated patience. "This isn't a negotiation where you have leverage. We have the house surrounded. There's no evacuation coming. We've made sure local and federal resources are thoroughly occupied with incidents elsewhere. This ends one of 2 ways. You hand over the evidence and walk away, or we come in and take it." Connor met Angela's eyes, silent communication passing between them. The threat was real, the danger immediate. They were trapped in a house with limited defensive positions, a child to protect, and no reasonable expectation of timely backup. "I need to check on Zoe," Connor murmured, receiving Angela's nod before moving in a crouch toward the bathroom. He found his daughter as instructed, curled in the bathtub, arms wrapped around her knees, Mr. Whiskers clutched against her chest. Her face was pale but composed, the determination in her eyes a mirror of his own. "Are the bad men back?" she asked softly. Connor nodded, not insulting her intelligence with false reassurances. "Yes, sweetheart, but Agent Rodriguez and I are going to handle it." "Like at the diner?" "Like at the diner," he confirmed. "I need you to stay right here, stay low, and no matter what you hear, don't come out until either Agent Rodriguez or I come get you. Can you do that?" Zoe nodded solemnly. "I'll be brave." "I know you will." Connor pressed a kiss to her forehead, trying to memorize every detail of her face in case. No, he wouldn't allow himself to think that way. "I love you more than anything in this world, Zoe. Remember that." "I love you too, Daddy." Connor returned to Angela, who had maintained their defensive position while simultaneously trying to reach backup on her phone. Her expression told him everything he needed to know. No help was coming in time. "Walsh was telling the truth," she said grimly. "Multiple incidents reported simultaneously across 3 counties. Bomb threats at schools, suspicious packages at government buildings. They're stretching emergency resources deliberately to isolate us." Connor processed this information with the cold efficiency of combat assessment. They're well-funded, well-organized, and determined. This isn't just about silencing witnesses anymore. It's about making an example. "I could try to negotiate," Angela suggested without conviction. "Buy time, at least." "They'll take the evidence and kill us anyway," Connor replied. "Men like Walsh don't leave loose ends." A new round of gunfire punctuated his assessment, bullets tearing through the remaining kitchen cabinets. They returned fire strategically, conserving ammunition while maintaining a defensive perimeter. "They're getting impatient," Angela observed. "They'll rush us soon." Connor was formulating a response when Walsh's voice carried through the shattered windows again. "Perhaps we need to adjust the incentives," he called conversationally. "Bring out the package." The dread in Connor's gut crystallized into icy certainty even before he heard the familiar voice. "Connor? Connor, they've got me." Dolores's voice trembled with fear and pain. Please help me. Angela's eyes widened in shock. How did they? They must have been watching the house, Connor realized. Saw her visit yesterday when she brought dinner. The kindly waitress had become a surrogate grandmother to Zoe after Sarah's death, a fixture in their lives who had risked herself to protect his daughter during the diner confrontation. Now we have a new proposition, Walsh announced. The evidence for the old woman. You have 30 seconds to decide before I start removing fingers. Angela's face reflected the impossible calculus they were facing. Sacrifice the evidence that could destroy Vincent's network and save countless children, or condemn Dolores to torture and death. I can't let them hurt her, Connor said, the decision crystallizing with painful clarity. She protected Zoe at the diner. I owe her everything. If we give them the evidence, they'll kill all of us anyway, Angela reminded him, though her voice betrayed her own struggle with the choice. Not if we control the exchange, Connor replied, a desperate plan forming. The flash drive I gave Vincent at the diner, it was a decoy. They'll expect the same trick. If we convince them the real evidence is digital, something that has to be verified before we hand it over completely, Angela caught his meaning immediately. Create an opportunity, but Connor, the risk is better than certainty, he finished. Get my tools from the garage, the small electronics kit in the red case. There's a data drive I use for client designs. We'll make it look authentic. Give us a chance to position ourselves better. As Angela moved to retrieve the items, Connor checked on Zoe once more, finding her still huddled in the bathtub but dry-eyed and composed. Stay here, he repeated, no matter what you hear. 20 seconds, Mr. Reeves, Walsh called from outside. The old woman is getting nervous about her future manual dexterity. Connor and Angela worked with frantic efficiency, preparing the flash drive with dummy files labeled with convincing titles, financial records, transport schedules, witness statements. Not enough to fool a thorough examination, but potentially convincing in the heat of an exchange. Walsh, Connor called through the shattered window. We're coming out. The old woman goes free, and you get the evidence. A wise decision, Walsh replied, hands visible, weapons left behind. Connor met Angela's eyes one final time. Ready? She nodded, slipping her backup weapon into her ankle holster, where it would remain concealed during the initial exchange. Ready. They emerged from the house with hands raised, Connor carrying the flash drive visibly between two fingers. The morning sunlight revealed the full tactical situation. 4 men in tactical gear surrounding the property, Walsh standing beside a kneeling Dolores whose hands were bound behind her back. The elderly waitress's face was bruised, her expression a mixture of fear and fierce determination. I'm sorry, she called to Connor. They came to the diner, said they'd hurt the other girls if I didn't come with them. Not your fault, Connor assured her, moving slowly toward the center of the yard where Walsh waited. Everything's going to be okay. Walsh smiled thinly. Touching optimism, Mr. Reeves. The evidence, if you please. Connor held up the flash drive. First, let Dolores go. She walks to the house, then you get this. I don't think you're in a position to make demands, Walsh observed casually, but as a gesture of good faith, he cut the zip ties binding Dolores's wrists. Once I've verified the data, she's free to go. Connor recognized the lie for what it was, but maintained his composed exterior. The next few moments would determine everything. You'll need to check it, he said, extending the drive. 2 years of investigation, all the evidence Agent Rodriguez collected on Vincent's operation. Financial records, witness statements, everything. Walsh's eyes narrowed with suspicion. And why would you surrender this so easily when you were willing to die protecting it an hour ago? Because I'm a father first, Connor replied truthfully. My daughter is in that house. Her safety matters more than anything else. The explanation seemed to satisfy Walsh, who gestured to one of his men. Check it. Make sure it's legitimate. As the man approached to take the drive, Connor carefully tracked positions and distances. Walsh 3 feet to his right, Dolores kneeling 5 feet beyond, Angela slightly behind his left shoulder, the remaining gunmen at strategic points around the perimeter. Not ideal, but workable if the timing was perfect. The man took the drive to a laptop set up on the hood of their unmarked van, inserting it and scanning through files. After a moment, he looked up. Looks real. File structures, naming conventions, timestamps, all consistent with FBI protocols. Walsh nodded with satisfaction. Excellent. It seems we can conclude our business with minimal. The distinct crack of a rifle shot interrupted him, the bullet striking the ground inches from Walsh's foot. Everyone froze, heads swiveling to locate the source of the unexpected intervention. Dolores moved with shocking speed for a woman her age, rolling away from Walsh and pulling a small revolver from beneath her sweater. Vietnam-era Colt Detective Special, she announced with grim satisfaction. Never leave home without it. Connor and Angela seized the momentary confusion, each targeting the nearest gunman. Connor's years of combat training translated into precise, economical movements. Disarm, disable, secure. Angela matched his efficiency, her FBI tactical training evident in every calculated strike. The second rifle shot came from the tree line beyond the house, dropping another of Walsh's men with a clean hit to the shoulder that disabled without killing. Connor recognized the shooting signature immediately. Controlled, precise, minimum force necessary. Military or law enforcement, definitely not Vincent's people. Walsh recovered quickly, raising his weapon toward Dolores, who had taken cover behind a garden planter. Connor launched himself forward, tackling the man with enough force to send them both crashing to the ground. The gun went spinning across the lawn as they grappled, Walsh's combat experience evident in his skilled counters to Connor's attacks. You should have taken the offer, Reeves, Walsh grunted, landing a solid blow to Connor's ribs. Now your daughter gets to watch you die. The words ignited something primal in Connor, a protective rage that transcended tactical training. He fought with the desperate intensity of a father defending his child, each movement fueled by love more powerful than fear. Angela had subdued her opponent and was moving to assist when Walsh managed to retrieve a hidden blade from his boot. The knife flashed in the morning sunlight as he drove it toward Connor's throat with deadly precision. Connor blocked the strike but felt the blade slice across his forearm, hot pain followed by the warm flow of blood. Walsh pressed his advantage, strength against strength, the knife inching closer to Connor's neck as they struggled. The third rifle shot resolved the deadlock, striking Walsh's shoulder with surgical precision. He howled in pain, the knife falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. Connor secured him with a restraint hold as Angela rushed forward, weapon trained on the disabled opponent. Federal agent, don't move, she commanded. Though the instruction was unnecessary, Walsh was effectively neutralized, his face contorted with pain and fury. Who's the shooter? Connor asked, scanning the tree line while maintaining pressure on his bleeding arm. His question was answered as a figure emerged from the woods. Sheriff Mike Townsend, rifle held with the competent ease of a Vietnam veteran who hadn't forgotten his training despite decades in law enforcement. Sorry I'm late, Mike called, approaching with wary vigilance, continuing to scan for potential threats. Your FBI friends were having trouble reaching me because my department was responding to a school bomb threat. Recognized it as a diversion tactic and figured you might need backup more than the empty elementary school did. Good call, Connor acknowledged, relief washing through him as the immediate danger receded. Dolores approached, her earlier fear replaced by righteous indignation as she glared at the restrained Walsh. This one ordered his goons to rough me up at the diner. Said they'd hurt the other Quayrises if I didn't cooperate. Mike raised an eyebrow at the small revolver still clutched in her hand. Thought you got rid of that piece 20 years ago, Dolores. She sniffed dismissively. A woman my age living alone needs protection. Besides, some habits die hard. Connor suddenly remembered Zoe, still huddled in the bathtub awaiting rescue. I need to get my daughter, he said, moving toward the house with urgent steps. He found Zoe exactly where he'd left her, pale but composed. Is it over, Daddy? She asked as he gathered her into his arms, heedless of the blood still seeping from his wounded forearm. It's over, sweetheart, he assured her, carrying her from the bathroom. The bad men can't hurt us anymore. Outside, the scene had transformed again. 2 police cruisers had arrived, officers securing Walsh and his men for transport. Angela was coordinating with someone on her phone, likely the FBI response team that had been delayed by the diversionary tactics. Zoe's eyes widened at the sight of Dolores. Miss Dolores, did the bad men hurt you? The elderly waitress smiled through her bruises. Nothing that won't heal, honey. Your daddy and Agent Rodriguez made sure of that. Mike approached Connor, eyeing the bleeding wound with professional concern. Paramedics are 5 minutes out. That's going to need stitches. I've had worse, Connor replied, though the adrenaline was beginning to fade, allowing pain to register more insistently. Angela joined them, her expression a complex mixture of relief, concern, and lingering professional focus. FBI tactical team is 15 minutes out. They'll secure the scene and transport the prisoners. Her eyes fixed on Connor's injury. That needs immediate attention. Before Connor could respond, Walsh's voice carried across the yard from where he sat handcuffed and awaiting transport. This changes nothing, Reeves. Vincent has resources you can't imagine. There's nowhere you can hide, nowhere your daughter will ever be truly safe. Connor felt Zoe tense in his arms, her face bearing against his shoulder. The threat ignited fresh protective fury, but Angela spoke before he could respond. That's enough, she snapped, stalking toward the restrained man with cold purpose. Vincent Carmine is finished. His network is exposed. His political protection is evaporating as we speak. And you? She leaned closer, voice dropping to a register only Walsh could hear. You're going to a federal facility where every guard, every inmate, and every administrator will know you traffic in children. I don't imagine your life expectancy in general population will be particularly impressive. The color drained from Walsh's face as the implications registered. Angela turned away from him dismissively, returning to Connor and Zoe with softened expression. He's just trying to scare us, she assured Zoe, gently brushing a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. But we're tougher than he thinks, aren't we? Zoe nodded solemnly. Daddy says being brave isn't not being scared. It's doing what's right, even when you are scared. Your daddy is a very wise man, Angela agreed, meeting Connor's eyes with an expression that communicated volumes beyond her simple words. The paramedics arrived moments later, insisting on examining Connor's wound despite his protest that it was minor. As they cleaned and bandaged his arm, Zoe remained close, unwilling to break physical contact after the morning's terrors. Will we still have to go away? She asked as the paramedic finished securing the bandage. Connor exchanged glances with Angela, who had been coordinating with her FBI colleagues throughout the medical treatment. What's the status? He asked her. Vincent is still at large, but his immediate support network is severely compromised, she reported. We've arrested Walsh and his team, secured the evidence, and alerted all relevant agencies to the situation. The immediate threat has been neutralized. But long-term, Connor pressed, needing honest assessment rather than reassurance. Angela considered her answer carefully, mindful of Zoe's attentive presence. The Bureau is recommending temporary relocation to a secure facility until Vincent is apprehended. After that, we'll need to evaluate. Connor nodded, having expected this response. Zoe needs stability. A complete disruption of her life would cause more harm than good. I understand, Angela replied. Let me make some calls, see what options we can develop that minimize the impact on her routine while maintaining necessary security. As she stepped away to coordinate with her colleagues, Sheriff Townsend approached, his rifle now secured in his vehicle. You've got a decision to make, son, he said quietly. This isn't going to blow over quickly. I know. Connor watched as FBI vehicles began arriving, agents securing the scene with professional efficiency. But running isn't the answer either. Zoe deserves better than a life in hiding. Mike nodded thoughtfully. Cedar Falls takes care of its own. Whatever you decide, you won't face it alone. The simple statement carried powerful resonance, a reminder that community created its own kind of security, that connections to people who cared provided protection that went beyond physical safety. Angela returned, her expression suggesting she'd reached some resolution. I've arranged for a safe house within 50 miles, close enough that Zoe can continue at her school with proper security protocols in place. We'll maintain the arrangement until Vincent is apprehended. And you? Connor asked, the question encompassing far more than professional responsibilities. I've been officially reassigned to the case, she replied. Full resources, complete authorization to pursue all leads. The Bureau suddenly finds my unauthorized investigation remarkably prescient now that it's yielded results. A hint of ironic amusement colored her tone, but Connor detected something else beneath it. A question she wasn't directly asking, an uncertainty about her place in whatever future emerged from the morning's chaos. Zoe would be disappointed if you weren't around to share pancakes once we're settled, he said, offering an opening without presumption. Angela's expression softened. I'd like that, she replied simply. 3 months later, Connor stood in his rebuilt workshop, running calloused fingers along the smooth edge of a cherry wood dining table. The house had been repaired, bullet holes patched, windows replaced, but subtle changes remained. Reinforced doors, a security system tied directly to both local police and FBI monitoring stations, new sight lines cleared in the surrounding property to eliminate potential concealment for unwelcome visitors. Vincent Carmine remained at large, though his organization had been systematically dismantled. Angela's evidence had led to dozens of arrests, the identification of numerous trafficking victims, and the exposure of several high-level government officials who had provided protection in exchange for bribes. The case had expanded far beyond Cedar Falls, reaching into quarters of power that had previously seemed untouchable. Zoe had returned to school after 2 weeks in the safe house, resuming her normal activities with the resilience unique to children. She attended twice-weekly sessions with a child psychologist who specialized in trauma, but already the therapist was reporting remarkable progress, citing Zoe's strong foundation of security and open communication with her father as key factors in her recovery. Connor heard the front door open, followed by Zoe's excited voice greeting Angela, who had become a daily presence in their lives. The FBI had established a temporary field office in Cedar Falls to coordinate the ongoing investigation, allowing Angela to remain close while still fulfilling her professional responsibilities. He set down his tools and moved toward the house, pausing in the doorway to observe the scene in his kitchen. Zoe stood on a step stool at the counter, carefully measuring flour into a mixing bowl, while Angela supervised with patient attention. Sunday morning pancakes had become a tradition again, though now prepared at home rather than at Mason's Diner, which remained closed for renovations. "Daddy," Zoe called, spotting him in the doorway. "We're making chocolate chip pancakes. Agent Angela is teaching me how to flip them without making a mess." Connor smiled at Angela's slightly embarrassed expression. Is she now? The same Agent Angela who managed to get batter on the ceiling last weekend? That was a tactical pancake maneuver, Angela defended with mock seriousness. Sometimes you have to sacrifice neatness for style points. The easy banter between them had developed gradually over the weeks of shared danger and recovery. What had begun as professional cooperation had evolved into friendship, and recently into something more complex and promising. Tentative steps toward a connection neither had expected, but both increasingly welcomed. "How's the table coming along?" Angela asked as Connor washed workshop dust from his hands at the kitchen sink. "Almost finished. Final sanding today, staining tomorrow." The table represented more than just a woodworking project. It was a replacement for the one Zoe had always associated with Mason's Diner, a new gathering place for their evolving family unit. As if reading his thoughts, Zoe announced, "When it's done, we're going to have a special dinner to celebrate. Miss Dolores is coming too." Dolores had recovered quickly from her ordeal, her innate toughness surprising even her doctors. She'd become a regular visitor to the Reeves household, bringing casseroles and stories that made Zoe giggle and Connor shake his head in amused disbelief. "That sounds perfect," Connor agreed, watching as Angela helped Zoe pour the first pancake onto the griddle. Later, as they sat around the kitchen table enjoying their breakfast, Zoe carefully creating syrup hearts across her stack just as she had that fateful morning at the diner, Connor found himself studying the scene with profound gratitude. The path had been unexpected, dangerous, painful at times, but it had led here, to this kitchen, this moment, these people who had become essential to his sense of home. Angela caught his contemplative expression. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly while Zoe focused on her artistic syrup application. Connor nodded, the simple gesture encompassing complex emotions. "You know, sometimes we find family in the places we least expect," he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "And courage shows up exactly when we need it most." Angela's hand found his beneath the table, fingers intertwining with natural ease. "I'm glad I was at the wrong table on the wrong day," she replied softly. Zoe looked up from her creation, studying the adults with perceptive eyes. Without comment, she reached out, taking one of Connor's hands and one of Angela's, completing the circle around the table. The three of them sat connected in the morning sunlight, a family forged in adversity but bound by something stronger than the circumstances of their meeting, the choice to stand together, to protect what mattered, to build something new from the fragments of what had been broken. Outside, Cedar Falls continued its quiet rhythms, unaware that in this ordinary house on Maple Street, extraordinary courage had changed the course of many lives, had proven once again that sometimes the most important battles were fought not by armies or governments, but by individuals who refused to look away when confronted with evil, who chose to say with quiet determination, "Wrong table, wrong day, gentlemen."